For the first time, a majority of Americans support sending U.S. troops to defend Taiwan if China invades.
Natalie speaks with prominent Taiwan expert Professor Shelley Rigger about why American support for Taiwan is growing.
And Staś Butler talks to Professor Chia C. Wang, who thinks our ideas about how COVID-19 spreads might be outdated.
Finally, in Hashtag Taiwan, I'll be talking about Taiwan Plus, a new government-funded initiative to bring Taiwan to the world. This is Taiwan Insider.
There's been a lot of Chinese military activity around Taiwan in recent months, and that has Taiwan on guard. Now, what kind of scenario might stir a Chinese attack on Taiwan? The Defense Ministry just came out with a report this week.
The Chinese military has stepped up its presence in the waters around Taiwan. Naval exercises in these parts are thought to be a message to both Taiwan and the U.S. This week, Taiwan's Defense Ministry released its annual assessment report of China's military capabilities. The report says there are 7 specific scenarios that would prompt China to attack Taiwan. The 7 scenarios are: Taiwan declares independence, Taiwan irreversibly gravitates towards independence, internal unrest in Taiwan, Taiwan becomes nuclear capable, cross-strait unification dialogue stalls, external powers intervene in Taiwan's affairs, or Taiwan accepts a foreign military presence. Editor-in-chief of Defense International magazine Chen Guoming says that China is certainly capable of neutralizing Taiwan's airports and harbors, but he says Taiwan is well prepared to fend off an amphibious invasion. The Defense Ministry report also says that China has strong electronic warfare capabilities, which means they have a firm grasp on Taiwan's military movements. In order to maintain capabilities, the Defense Ministry has set aside roughly $1.7 billion to purchase weapons for its F-16 fighter jets. That money will also go into purchasing various American-made and locally produced drone and missile systems as well. Chen says that the money the Defense Ministry is setting aside is worth it. He says the benefits of the weapons purchased will well outweigh their costs. With the addition of this latest expenditure, Taiwan's defense spending in 2022 will reach a staggering $17 billion, a new high. But more important than the amount is the message. If push comes to shove, Taiwan will protect itself.
For the first time, a majority of Americans support sending U.S. troops to defend Taiwan. That was from a recent survey by the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. There are a lot of interesting findings from that survey. 52% of Americans say they support sending U.S. troops to defend Taiwan if China invades. 69% favor recognizing Taiwan as an independent country. 65% support Taiwan joining international organizations, and 57% support a free trade agreement with Taiwan. There seems to be an increase of American support for Taiwan. Now, why has this happened? Well, I spoke with a prominent expert on Taiwan in the United States, Professor Shelley Rigger. She is a Brown Professor of Political Science at Davidson College. She's also the author of many books on Taiwan, including Why Taiwan Matters, Small Island Global Powerhouse. I asked her what she thought of the survey and why she thinks Americans are increasing their support for Taiwan.
Well, I think it's always good news when Americans are engaged and willing to take a position, first of all, because this is an issue that a lot of Americans don't necessarily have a lot of information about. On the other hand, I would not give too much importance to the changes from the previous survey to this survey, just because I think that some of the results in the survey suggest that this is kind of a pretty thin result, that while it's maybe a kind of gut reaction, I want to do something to help out Taiwan. The rest of the survey doesn't really give me a lot of confidence that people are well informed or are making a kind of coherent case for why the U.S. should, maybe make its policy a little bit more favorable to Taiwan.
So I think one interesting statistic was that 69% said they favor Taiwan becoming an independent country. And for us, if we were to declare independence, China would definitely invade us. So I think that kind of does show that people don't understand all the consequences of these different questions. Do you agree?
Yes, I do. And I also found the wording of the independence question, the wording of the question basically says Taiwan is a self-governed place, even though the PRC claims it. The U.S. treats Taiwan as a separate entity. Do you think we should recognize Taiwan independence? It almost seemed like the question was saying the U.S. treats Taiwan as an independent country, so should we treat Taiwan as an independent country? It was a very leading question, I thought. And it gave no sense of the trade-off that you just mentioned that I think would have maybe, caused people to answer differently. And this is why survey research as a guide to foreign policy is so difficult, because very often people don't think about the trade-offs that are involved in a particular foreign policy decision until they're actually faced with the consequences. And then they say, oh my, how did that happen? So I think what we see here is we see a rising sympathy for Taiwan, a sense of, hey, this is a good place, and the U.S. should do what it can to take care of Taiwan. And what that means is that then the sort of public opinion context, if the U.S. were to have to take some action to defend or support Taiwan, would be more favorable, right? So if you go into a crisis and 80% of the people in your country say we don't want to get involved, then even if the president recognizes it's in the interest of the U.S. to get involved, it's going to be harder. If you have 70% saying, yeah, go for it, then in the moment of crisis, the president is still going to have to make a decision based on national interest. No U.S. president goes to war solely on the grounds of public opinion, but it does kind of change the context. And so I think that it's not an insignificant finding. It's just one that I wouldn't recommend that, Taiwan independence advocates start saying, well, Americans all want us to be independent, so we should too. I think, we need to calm down and recognize that Americans who give that answer are not maybe thinking through the consequences in a way that they would if the moment actually arrived.
I am still curious also about public sentiment in the U.S. about Taiwan. It seems that it's growing, right? Can you explain, is there any particular reason or events in the past half year or year that you think has influenced public sentiment about Taiwan?
So one thing that's definitely going on is U.S. favorability toward the PRC is diminishing. And for many people, there is this kind of awareness that Taiwan is a kind of alternative to the PRC, or that Taiwan stands with the U.S. as our relationship with mainland China deteriorates. But I don't know that that's exactly enough to create this upswelling of positive sentiment toward Taiwan, because knowing that you don't like China, or that, you're upset about things that are happening in China, doesn't necessarily give you an awareness of Taiwan as an alternative. Where I think the awareness of Taiwan as an alternative has come from is the COVID crisis, where many, many Americans are learning about Taiwan for the first time. And I'm experiencing this directly because people say, oh, you study Taiwan. Well, how come they had such good success against COVID? So, I think that Taiwan's gotten a lot of very positive attention in the U.S. and around the world for its COVID response. I know my friends in Taiwan, they say, oh, yeah, but then we had this COVID crisis of our own. And, yes, but unlike anybody else, you've managed to contain and prevent it from becoming uncontrollable in Taiwan. And now it seems as if the COVID crisis in Taiwan has receded, and there is the opportunity for Taiwanese to be vaccinated before, another wave comes along. And I think Taiwanese will be vaccinated, unlike many Americans who are, this has just become so political in the U.S. It's really tragic. So I think it's as much the positive attention that Taiwan has gained as a result of its successful response, and I still characterize Taiwan's response as successful even after this summer. Relative to almost every other country in the world, Taiwan's response has been very successful. People in the U.S. know that, and so I think that may be where the awareness of Taiwan, somewhat as an alternative to the PRC, but also as a sort of good story in its own right, may be coming from.
It was fascinating speaking with Professor Shelley Rigger. She is a Brown Professor of Political Science at Davidson College. The whole interview will be up on YouTube and Facebook. Now next, Staś Butler speaks with an expert about the latest science on how COVID-19 spreads.
Masks, alcohol spray, temperature checks. People in Taiwan are used to living with all kinds of COVID-19 prevention measures, and those measures are based on our best scientific understanding of how COVID-19 spreads. But, of course, that understanding can change. I spoke to Professor Chia C. Wang at National Sun Yat-sen University. Professor Wang is the lead author on a recent article in Science, one of the world's top scientific journals. And she says we might be underestimating the role of tiny particles we breathe in spreading COVID-19. Now that, of course, has big implications for how we fight the virus.
As someone living in Taiwan, it's a familiar sight, I'm sure, to people here and to people around the world to see, restaurant staff, to see people on public transportation wiping down tables and wiping down surfaces and wiping down handles to stop the spread of COVID-19. Have we overestimated how much this virus spreads through surfaces?
I would say yes, because the importance of formalin transmission has recently to be proved as a minor transmission pathway. And it is not as important as we previously anticipated.
Moving on, I guess, to this idea of the kind of droplet transmission, which is through kind of sneezes and coughs. I mean, anyone who's sneezed and coughed in public in the last year and a half knows that people are very concerned about infection through that particular route. But you say we've overestimated that risk. Why is that?
Because usually when people cough or sneeze, they can indeed produce some droplets, and usually it's larger than 100 micron. Normally they would fall down to the ground or some surfaces within just a few seconds. So that means they cannot travel longer than 1 meter.
Your article also has an interesting kind of conclusion. In Taiwan at the moment, part of the current regulations are that if you go to a restaurant, the restaurants all have these plastic dividers between seats that in theory stop droplet transmission. But your article has an interesting conclusion about that. What is it?
Okay, that is based on a recent research. They found out that the physical barriers like desk shields, they can presumably trap higher concentration of aerosols in the breathing zone. So that means that would increase the risk of inhaled aerosols.
So you would advise on the basis of this evidence that perhaps we shouldn't be using these kinds of boards in restaurants?
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend it. Yeah.
So if you were in charge of Taiwan's sort of COVID-19 prevention policy right now, what changes would you make to current regulations?
Well, I'm not in charge, but I can suggest that aerosol precautionary measures should be implemented as soon as possible to reduce the risk of airborne transmission, including the universal masking with fit. As we know that Taiwan government has enforced the mask wearing, but the mask wearing with fit is important point to focus, and also the air ventilation. We need to improve the air ventilation in most public places, in most buildings, and also we can encourage all the public places to implement air cleaner that is equipped with HEPA filter that can efficiently capture aerosols.
The full interview will be up on Facebook and YouTube, and I thoroughly recommend you give the full study a read on science.org. Next up, Leslie has good news from Taiwan's Paralympics team.
Taiwan's presidential office on yesterday, held a celebration for Taiwan's Olympians who participated in the Tokyo 2020 Olympics. And that's because they delivered Taiwan's best performance at any Olympic Games ever. However, the Tokyo 2020 Paralympics are still ongoing, and there's great news on that front too. Allow me to introduce you to Taiwan's first Paralympic medalist since 2004, Tian Xiaowen. 21-year-old Tian Xiaowen won Taiwan's first medal at the Tokyo 2020 Paralympics last Saturday. She took bronze in the table tennis women's singles Class 10 event. Tian's Paralympic medal is Taiwan's first since the 2004 Athens Paralympics. Tian's right hand suffered nerve damage at birth, limiting the scope of its capabilities, a congenital condition that she was bullied for while growing up. However, Tian began playing table tennis at the age of 9, which helped her gain confidence. In fact, Tian got so good that she's now ranked 5th in the world for her category. At the Paralympics, Tian won all 3 of her group matches. On her way to the quarterfinals, she defeated the 3rd and 7th ranked players in the world. Still, as outstanding as her performance was, Tian remains humble and says that her bronze medal was an unexpected outcome.
Next up, Leslie introduces a brand new player in the world of Taiwanese media in #Taiwan.
Last week, I told you about Taiwan X. This week, I'm going to be telling you about Taiwan Plus. And if the comedy gods allow, in the next 2 weeks, I'm going to be telling you about Taiwan Minus and Taiwan Divide. So what is Taiwan Plus? Well, to tell you that, we have to go back to July 2020. Back then, the Taiwanese government was looking to develop and establish an English-language multimedia broadcast platform focused on Taiwan. The plan was to spend 1 billion new Taiwan dollars to develop an online streaming platform where people could find news, programs, features, documentaries, and other content about Taiwan. A lot happened during this period, but eventually Taiwan's Central News Agency, or CNA for short, was tasked with developing the platform. The government wanted this platform to launch on January 1st of this year, but that didn't happen, so that's why we're talking about it this week. As you may have figured out, the platform is called Taiwan Plus. There was a big launch ceremony on August 30th, which important people like Vice President Lai Ching-te, Legislative Speaker You Xi-kun, Culture Minister Li Yong-de attended, and RTI show host Andrew Ryan. Now, I'm not going to tell you what he's doing there because I want to encourage you to check out Taiwan Plus. It's jam-packed with great videos, and they do live newscasts multiple times a day. They got programs on lifestyle, technology, culture, and nature. Is that a pangolin? Aw, look how cute he is. Anyway, President Tsai gave a pre-recorded speech at the launch where she called Taiwan Plus, quote, an exciting new initiative to tell Taiwan's story. Taiwan Plus's mission statement on its website says, Taiwan Plus is the voice of a vibrant, free Taiwan and Asia. At a time when Taiwan's international presence is being suppressed and many voices in the region are being silenced, Taiwan Plus tells these stories in a way that informs, inspires, and empowers. Our mission is to celebrate freedom, equality, human rights, openness, and innovation, values that define Taiwan and the world in which we all want to live. Through our unique brand of digital storytelling, we aim to showcase the vibrance and diversity of Taiwan and all that this beautiful island nation has to offer. Now that is something I can get behind. So go and check out Taiwan Plus. And for those of you who are worried that Taiwan Plus's great content might cut into your Taiwan Insider watch time, well, don't be. Because as many great things you can find on Taiwan Plus, you'll still need your regular dose of me. Come for the show, stay for the Leslie. That's what I say.
Before we leave you, here's a look at some of the other stories that are on our radar.
Taiwan has received its first batch of BioNTech COVID vaccine doses. The 930,000 doses arrived early Thursday and will start being administered in the middle of the month at the earliest. This is the first batch of 15 million doses purchased for Taiwan by tech giants TSMC and Foxconn and by Buddhist charity the Tzu Chi Foundation. The ruling parties of Taiwan and Japan have held security talks for the first time. 2 representatives from Taiwan's Democratic Progressive Party and Japan's Liberal Democratic Party met in the 90-minute virtual conference last Friday. High on the agenda was cooperation in the face of Chinese actions in the region. School is back in session. Taiwanese students went back to the classroom Wednesday after a period of online classes and the longest summer break in Taiwan's history, both courtesy of COVID-19. Pandemic prevention measures like mask wearing, temperature checks, and even separation of students behind dividers during lunch are all in place to keep COVID in check. The Mid-Autumn Festival is on the way, and with a number of new COVID cases still low, the railways will cautiously increase seating capacity for the holiday. Up to 80% of seats may be filled when the festival rolls around, and other restrictions will be loosened as well, though masks will still be mandatory in many circumstances.
Well, we're back in the studio for our final question of the day. We're all aware, obviously, that it's back to school. Thankfully, not for us. But if you did have to go back to school and you had to do school again, what would you do differently? Leslie, why don't you go first?
Well, I thought about this. This is kind of easy. I would apply myself a little more. Because if you knew me back in school, it would always come down to crunch time that I would do my best. It's like, oh, you're not doing too well this semester, you better pick it up. And then for the last half of the semester, I set the curve once.
Really?
And then I was just like, if I could just do that all throughout school, just how different would my life be?
You need someone breathing down your neck, basically.
Yeah, and in many cases, it was me breathing down my own neck because I was terrified of failure. But at the same time, like, if I could just do that all the time, think about where I would be.
You turned out pretty well, Leslie. Things are going pretty well for you. Well, I think I would have gone for the tennis team because actually I went for track and cross country, but I think it would have been more fun to play tennis competitively, looking back.
Did you play a bit?
I played a little bit on the side, but never got real serious about it. So I think
it helps that our office is right next to a tennis court.
Right, that makes me feel like I need to play more tennis.
It's inspiring you. Well, for me, sadly, it's more about dropping a subject. I would say no geography. I'm sorry, Mr. Porter. You were a great teacher. I enjoyed your lessons, but the subject just wasn't for me. I'm just going to say goodbye to that. That's all we have for this week's episode of Taiwan Insider. I'm Staś Butler.
I'm Natalie Tso.
And I'm Leslie Liao.
Make sure to follow our social media channels. You can find us on Facebook and YouTube.
Yes, and leave a comment, subscribe, like us.
Don't forget to tweet at us. Our handle is Taiwan Insider. Anyway, guys, until next week, see ya.
Bye.